One of the people that you would have noticed wasn't one of the speakers through the weekend is Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. And it's a great honor to have him here, for those of you who know him. But for those of you who don't, I think maybe we're going to start with maybe just introduce yourself and tell people what you do and all, maybe brag a bit. You've done some pretty amazing stuff with the sales and NASA and all of that. So tell people all of that, and then we'll try and get a conversation going here. All right.
Yeah, I'll keep it. Well, Doug, thank you very much for having me on the panel. I appreciate all you've done for this community, bringing everybody together. I mean, this really is the future, to be advocates for low-carb science, moving the science into human application. That's kind of like our slogan that we have. I've been a basic science researcher all my life for like 20 years, and more recently, after basic science research, we are moving into clinical trials, really trying to advance the use of ketogenic therapies, which include dietary therapies and exogenous ketone therapies for different applications. And I guess, I'm excited to field any questions related to that. My expertise has been primarily basic science research, and it's really exciting to see this crowd attend multiple events. And we also host the Metabolic Health Summit, which was in Santa Barbara a few months ago. And I'm just more and more excited every event that I attend and talk to people. It's really, you guys are making this happen, so thank you for being here. And I think it was a great idea to have this panel, because it really engages the audience. And I know you guys have lots of questions, so I'll stop talking, because I think that's the important thing, to get the audience engaged in this, to really use our expertise to field your questions. And I think more and more panels need to be part of the conferences. So thanks, Doug, for having me, and and I'll stop there.
Okay, so maybe to get started, there was a few people who wanted to ask questions of Peter and somebody else that we had to cut off as well. So if you guys want to come back up and ask those questions that you were going to ask then, you can do that. But otherwise, come and start asking them stuff.
I'll start.
Okay. Well, go for it.
Dr. Finney.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Where is he?
He had to go home.
Oh, he had to go home. Oh, no. I'm sorry.
No, he had to take Rod Taylor back to Australia, or to the airport to go to Australia.
I punted a question for me, and please come to the microphone. I'm just improving here, Yeah. He was going to answer the question on electrolytes, magnesium, potassium, sodium. The question earlier that I turfed now was how much. And you have to look at the art and science of low carbohydrate nutrition. Email him. That would be awesome if there were 100 emails asking for books. Because in there, he'll say exactly how much sodium, magnesium, and all. And I can never remember off the top of my head, but he remembers. So, but you want to think of all those three. And I don't think it really matters if you get the proprietary or the individual bullion supplement, that sort of thing. But it's simpler and more convenient if you get it all in one pack, but it's more expensive to do that. So you do want to be careful about those electrolytes, especially in the context of atrial fibrillation or heart failure, especially if you're on a diuretic pill that makes you depleted of the electrolytes. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, cool. Is that a previous question, or is it a new one?
So this had to do with, and Dr. Cyrus is not on the panel, but my question had been for Dr. Cucuzzella. With Dr. Cyrus' lecture, and he discussed the hyperinsulinemic, obesogenic individual and the hyperglycemic, diabesogenic individual. As trainers, as health coaches, as nutritionists, as practitioners, how do we address them differently? Lactate threshold, training them in, should they or should they not do resistance training, aerobic training, keto, how strict, too strict? In other words, should we be treating the diabesogenic versus the obesogenic person differently, even in, say, using ketones? Thank you.
I'll take a stab at that. There's really not much published in that specific space, but if we just look at the basic physiology, so the diabesogenic versus the obesogenic. So the diabesogenic person may not even have a high BMI, but they're hyperinsulinemic. And as you saw from the Samalan and Brooks study, so that diabetic Med-S patient, they basically, walk out the door and their lactate is up and their fat ox is like right down. So that person is going to need to be super, super slow to reset that, and obviously go low carb, right? Treat the metabolic syndrome with diet, sleep, reduce stress, everything you can. That person's sick, right? Make sure they don't have cardiovascular disease. The one who is more, and Eric's probably got a lot of clinical experience, maybe Dom from the bench, studying, more biomarkers on these people. The one who's more obese, but otherwise metabolically fairly well, and I have a 700-pound patient in my clinic with an A1C of 5.3 who could, bench press. He was a former football player. Right? This guy's got tons of muscle, and he can do a lot of physical work carrying a conversation on. We've actually put him on a treadmill. And so, he has pretty well developed probably those insulin-dependent glucose transporters. Muscle contraction brings those insulin-independent glucose transporters to the surface of the muscle in someone who's otherwise well, but that phenomenon is not happening in the diabetic patient, at least not optimally. So that person, just the talk test. So if that person, who is more obese but metabolically pretty well, can walk, can cycle, can row, hike, and is chatting, then just by, they're not producing high levels of lactate, and they're in zone 2, meaning their respiratory, we call it the ventilatory threshold also. There's a lot of names for similar things. So ventilatory threshold is when, you're out for a ride and you're carrying a conversation, and then all of a sudden, you're carb burning there. So keep these folks, below that ventilatory threshold, and certainly be aware of mechanical issues, right? Structural, hips, knees, back, their movement patterns. Remember that optimal human organism, right? Hardware, which is your structure, movement patterns, software, and energy system. So as a coach, you're looking at the whole person and saying, okay, where's trained for your weakness? I think Laird Hamilton said that, the best big wave surfer ever to live. But I don't know, anyone else have any thoughts on that? Eric?
Yeah, so the metaphor I'm going to use here is that there are a lot of different kinds of cars. And when you get onto the car lot, sales lot, it seems like that's the only car that exists. So, you go to the Ford dealer, they're not going to talk to you about a VW. So there are a lot of different styles, and the Verta Health is kind of like, the Tesla, it's a lot of, it's high tech and all that. My approach, I don't even talk about exercise. People who end up in my office in a clinical setting, I can fix them by just changing the diet. But I use a keto diet at a 20 total carb or less per day. You heard Finney say 30 total carbs, so somewhere in there. The End Your Carb Confusion book that I wrote with Amy Berger that came out, we have so you can check blood and all that, or you can actually just ask questions of people. And it sorts you into different groupings of carb levels that we think maybe is where you should start, and then see how you do. And in there it's a 20 gram or less, 50 gram or less, 150 grams or less as a carb. So that's End Your Carb Confusion. So if you look at the book and you read it, you'll not be confused anymore.
Would you treat those two groups of people differently, though, in other words? Would you address those groups of people differently in how you jump into keto and stuff? You would treat them exactly the same?
Well, so you can do a questionnaire and see where you think people are. So if they have PCOS, that's a sign of insulin resistance. You could do blood tests, and you can go to the doctor's office and get a glucose and insulin test and see, so we're trying to make things accessible, and in a clinical setting, you could do all of these blood tests, and you could say, well, here's where I think you need to be. Me personally, I start everyone at the prescription strength level of 20 grams or less, because if you're waiting 3 months, 6 months to see me, and I say, well, would you like to try something that might work? Or would you like to try something that I know will work the first time, every time, across all metabolic types? That's my perspective. So it's like the car dealerships, there are different types and all that. I kind of sell the simple one without a whole lot of amenities or whatever you call them, extras on the car. But you'll go to the next, and it's going to be very fancy. And so where you're sitting and who you're dealing with makes a big difference in how you approach it. Not everyone needs to do a keto diet, but it will work for everyone, if they do it. And then so that's the clinical perspective of, but a lot of people will access the books or the coaching, and they don't need that level of carbohydrate restriction.
Anybody else?
Yeah, what he said. It's good. So
I know, I don't want to jump in until they're done.
there's no substitute for experience in the clinic, and I don't know anyone here who has more experience than Dr. Westman here in just treating patients and so many varieties of phenotypes you probably see. So, 20 grams of carbs, low carb approach, and you're not really advocating calories in, calories out, right? It just simply, which is, we're in the minority here. I teach nutrition at the College of Medicine, and that's pretty firm. They're pretty firm on that. But I mean, your experience is that you adjust the carbs, fix the underlying pathology of insulin resistance, and then the calories will auto-adjust based on behavior. Yeah.
It's so amazing to have access to such a panel. Thank you. My question is for Dr. D'Agostino. This morning I asked Dr. Finney his opinion about exogenous ketones, and he was somewhat lukewarm about them. I know you've done a lot of research on them, and you've gone from using esters to salts, including the ones that we had access to today. My question to you is, HVMM also has a new product out, which is a precursor, as best as I can tell, to an ester, and you take it. Do you have any experience with them, and do you have an opinion on that product?
Yeah, I've probably consumed more 1,3-butanediol than anybody else on the planet. Just a simple chemistry. 1,3-butanediol is a dialcohol or a diol molecule, and when you consume 1,3-butanediol, not 1,4, that's totally different, but 1,3-butanediol, that will, through your liver, an alcohol dehydrogenase, the liver will convert that to beta-hydroxybutyrate, and that will effectively elevate your beta-hydroxybutyrate. 1,3-butanediol has a mild narcotic effect. If you take it, you get buzzed, you feel a little bit drunk at about, especially 1 gram per kilogram, which is a dose that'll get you into that 4 to 5 millimolar range. My concern with that product is that, especially in an older population, that could lead to them falling. That could be, and also if you consume 1,3-butanediol over a period of time and check your liver enzymes, you're going to see them go up, just as if you were drinking alcohol. So it does put a stress on the liver, and you are selectively elevating beta-hydroxybutyrate in a way that does not also seem to elevate acetoacetate. And I think there's a redox balance that the body has in between beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate, whereas when you consume the salts, you could measure acetoacetate, and there's a conversion, an inner conversion there that we don't completely understand. But the early HVMN, there's ketone esters that are 1,3-butanediol beta-hydroxybutyrate monoester. So you can take 1,3-butanediol and attach beta-hydroxybutyrate to it. That gets quickly released, so your beta-hydroxybutyrate gets elevated very quickly. And then the 1,3-butanediol gets metabolized over the course of a longer period of time. So it's kind of like a nice spike and then an elevation. So the salts are a little bit different in that they are directly delivering beta-hydroxybutyrate. And unlike, for example, there are various electrolyte products out there, like Element, I'm a fan, I like it. But Element combines it with chloride. So a ketone salt will take the electrolytes, sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, and bind it to beta-hydroxybutyrate. So when you consume it, it's replenishing those electrolytes that are so important with a low-carb diet and delivering the ketones at the same time. So it's a really, and we have found that you really do not want to elevate beta-hydroxybutyrate or ketones above like a 1.5 or 2 millimolar range because you're releasing insulin. When we're on a ketogenic diet, that's how the counter-regulatory mechanisms of maintaining physiological ketosis, not talking about type 1 diabetes, is that our ketones are built up in the system and we have ketonuria to excrete them, but the ketones, as they rise up, they will also stimulate the pancreas to release a little bit of insulin to decrease beta oxidation of fatty acids in the liver to finely tune that. When you throw in a large dose of a ketone ester, that counter-regulatory mechanism gets messed up and you release insulin, which is not great for fat burning, but then you decrease your own endogenous ketone production. With ketone salts, we have not seen that to happen. So if I even take a maximum dose of ketone salts and test my insulin, 1 hour later, there's a tiny little blip, and then your endogenous production is not, inhibited. So, I'm saying that, and I've done most of my research on ketone ester, and I think there's applications there, but they're more medical applications, maybe military, operational. Whereas I have access to anything, and I would prefer to use a ketone electrolyte salt.
That's great. So just a follow-up. So I think a company called Ketone X does a beta-hydroxybutyrate that's attached to the 1,3 diol that you were discussing. So I wasn't sure if you were saying that was better, or you should still stay away from that because of the liver action and stick with the salts?
Yeah. Well, 1,3-butanediol, like I said, it requires liver metabolism, and that it is technically an alcohol. So you have to view it from that context.
Right, okay.
And the reason, just look in the literature, the old literature. In 1975, there was a paper published on the use of 1,3-butanediol for long-duration spaceflight. It's a very interesting molecule. It's super stable, and it'll elevate, but the two things that prevented that was that it had a narcotic effect and that it tasted absolutely awful. So,
Most esters
but
do,
it actually met the criteria from MIT actually did some research as the most promising space food. So what we did actually for one of our ketone esters is take 1,3-butanediol, and then we did a trans-esterification to add acetoacetate to it. So when you consume it, it elevates both beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate, which gets back to what Dr. Finney was talking about, that the acetoacetate, that balance. And that could be good for some medical applications, but it's not something that I would personally want to take, whereas I gravitate to an electrolyte beta-hydroxybutyrate formulation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Was the 1,3 the booth at MHS? Drink
there-
this new alcohol.
Yeah. It's dirt cheap. You can buy it in 55-gallon drums and just repackage it. But it's definitely nothing that's innovative. This has been around since the 40s and 50s, 1,3-butanediol. Whereas the salts are a bit more innovative in my mind.
Hello. If the standard of care is the minimum of professional competence in each practice area, is there an established best practices in metabolic health and treatment of insulin resistance?
Yeah, well, so our organization has a therapeutic carbohydrate restriction guideline, and it is the standard of care based on this organization's point of view. I think every organization is going to have their own bias, and ours is one of lifestyle change, including things as bizarre as a low-carb, high-fat diet. To the rest of the world, most of the other organizations that I'm aware of use medications as a standard of care.
And then just as a brief follow-up, does that include a standard set of labs or metrics that you recommend to track the progress of one along that journey?
I think what's actually exciting is what the good Dr. Wellington is the lead in is the textbook. That like any field that is going to say there is a standard of care, we've got wonderful articles, Eric's books, Verda, Dr. Finney's books, but to have a textbook that will address all the slices of this is I'm looking forward to that, and I think that will establish what we do in a different light. I don't know. I'm going to pass it to Neville because that's like an epic lift to do that.
Yes, it is. and I think most of this panel have contributed, and so I'm looking forward to seeing the final version. And I think that will set the bar for us because it will give credibility to what we've been doing. Certainly, I think Prof Noakes has been very keen on this book because it's going to help us move this forward even further, and it will open the door for us to do what we've been accused of not doing, which is going to other medical conferences and getting the word out to the skepticals or the against, I guess.
Thank you very much.
Well, and I would also say like in the medical schools, right? So if you've got the really good teachers that are in the medical schools, now the professors teaching everybody. Anyway, that's just my thought. So this is a little bit of a different question, and you can actually even chime in. It seems like there's a lot of low-carb/keto conferences around, well, certainly the United States, but I know they're in Australia and lots of other places. And someone, and I think it was Nina, talked about like little pebbles, and how when you have little pebbles, they don't make any noise, but then all put together, they become a big rock. So I'm wondering, and I want to hear really from all of you, of how do you get, like LowCarbUSA or SMH to meet with, I don't know, some of these other low-carb conferences that you guys all speak at, I'm sure, and keto conferences, to all like become one big happy family, so that we can then be a big rock and go to the government and go to these committees that that won't listen to us about our knowledge and research on this subject. And so I just want to hear if there's any progress being made, what's going on. Let's go. Let's do it.
So, can I answer that? So, and I think I haven't done a really good job of explaining to everybody what's going on with the SMHP and LowCarbUSA, for instance. Okay, so I kind of wear both hats. I actually wear different shirts, but it's the same thing. What happened was that the board of directors of the SMHP decided that they should be hosting and putting on high-level scientific conferences. And the thought was that since we didn't have, as the SMHP, we didn't have the wherewithal to put in a conference on. But LowCarbUSA, that's what they do. So the SMHP is effectively engaging LowCarbUSA to put this conference on. But the idea is that this is a symposium for metabolic health and that there will be many. And there will be the Symposium for Metabolic Health hosted by Low Carb Down Under and hosted by the Public Health Collaboration in the UK and maybe by Keto Life in Switzerland. And the reason Dr. Finney is not here for the panel is that he had to take Rod Taylor back to the airport to fly back to Australia. And Rod was visiting here with us this weekend. He is the founder of Low Carb Down Under, and he's on fire about trying to unite, get Nina and the Nutrition Coalition and us and Low Carb Down Under and the Public Health Collaboration with Dave Unwin and his wife Jane, and get them all united underneath the SMHP banner. So our vision and the board's... So that was the vision of guys like Eric and what's your name, Mark, and some of the other board members, was that like when we started this, we didn't know that it was going to happen, but we hoped that it would create this umbrella organization that would give people that have these core fundamental beliefs, right? We all got different ideas about how exactly it needs to look, but we have core beliefs. And so this is a place for all of those people to unite. And ask Pam, I mean, I've been close to tears in the last couple of weeks with the number of people like Rod and Nina, who've come to me and said, we need to do this, we need to get united, we need to get organized. Rob Sivers is on our board as well, and he was talking about it, that we need to have a united voice. And I'm excited that I mean, it hasn't really happened yet, but people are actually coming out of the woodwork. We've been scraping and scrimping and trying to make something happen on our own, and it hasn't been happening. And now other people are coming to us and saying, we want to help you to make that happen, and that makes me really happy.
If I could add on to that, this is the heavy lifting of Doug and Pam, but the main difference of this meeting and this organization is that it's a society of membership. And so I've been president of a society, the Obesity Medicine Association, which is mainly physicians and mainly medications being used, and we've taught this method there for a long time, but it's going to be taken over, I think, mainly by the drug industry, like most medical organizations. And so we're basically creating new things, getting outside. We actually talk about food, which is unusual for doctors. You know, has your doctor ever asked you what you eat and drink? You know, so also this organization and this meeting that goes along with it you don't have to have an MD or a DO. You can be a coach, you can be a dietitian or a physician. So we're realizing that I think the end solution is not to train more doctors. You don't need to know how to do surgery if you're going to talk to someone about the food, right? So we need to actually train new types of practitioners that cut across a new field of knowledge to help the metabolism, and I think we should do it without drugs and devices, and we'll actually be able to create relief workers in a disaster situation, which is what we're in. You know, so that's kind of a main difference of this meeting is that it's associated with this organization. Hopefully we'll get other meetings associated with the organization to help grow it, but there will always be the Metabolic Health Summit where it's very scientific. I mean, it's so geeky, I can't understand 2/3 of the thing. So you wouldn't want to go to the Metabolic Health Summit maybe, or I don't want to say that, but it's just a different focus. And then you have the Keto Con, the Keto Fest, the Keto this, you know, that's consumers only. You know, there's no medical aspect to it and no membership group to it. So I think there will always be different types of meetings, and we may not be able to get one big happy family. I think that would be okay, but this society is trying to do its best to bring together practitioners and have a meeting that really addresses the consumer and the practitioner at the same time. But you realize this is all new space, which is, I think, really fun and creative and exciting, but it means we have to be tolerant of creating something new.
Just to add to your comment too, I think we all need to come together and lift up each society. I think, you know, this is really about application here, and Metabolic Health Summit is more about science. It started as a small scientific conference at the University of South Florida, like in 2014 or 15. I actually got like $10,000 to make a small conference. It was really about epilepsy. And then we realized that the ketogenic diet has so many applications beyond epilepsy. So we started doing cancer research, and then we did the Metabolic Therapeutics Conference, I think. And then it just started growing because there was so much interest in this field. But I think the important thing is that we need to collaborate and co-advertise and co-support and really just bring this community. Because there's going to be niche applications, you know, from the basic science, geeky science perspective. But our motto is like bringing science to human application, but it gets into the geekiness a lot. But I think it's also really important to bring in sponsors, but there's a fine line because, you know, the sponsors may have technologies or food products or apps or wearable devices like Abbott and Dexcom or Medtronics, and they are creating technologies that are helping us implement and figure out how these therapies are working. And I think that's a really important component that maybe this conference could leverage that. But at the same time, if you're doing CME events, you're kind of restricted in some ways, from the company side. But I think there's a way to monetize this in a way where we can, entrepreneurs are scrambling to the space to develop various things to help us implement. And I think that's going to be important for the whole vision. And that's why these huge medical conferences do so well and bring in tens of thousands of people, because there's just, the pharmaceutical companies are supporting that. But I think there's a very rich, fruitful environment for entrepreneurs to really develop things to help us in this space. But I think the important thing is that we all need to collaborate, co-support, sponsor, and lift every conference up to get the word out.
So, yeah, I just want to answer a little bit of that too, from our point of view. Obviously, from South Africa, when Prof. Noakes kind of got started with this whole movement there, and in 2015, Eric and a number of guys came out to South Africa and spoke at the conference, Andreas, and we were really overwhelmed by the response we had then, and there was a lot of interest. But what we then discovered is that there just weren't, a lot of patients were emailing him, asking him, now who can I see? Because my doctor doesn't want to do this, or my physician doesn't want to do it. He tells me it's bad. My cardiologist is telling me. So we then decided to have a conference in Cape Town, which initially we had about 80 people attend. And we recorded everything, put it online, and thought we'd get some people watching it. And within a month, we had sort of 600 people watching it, many of them from this place, from the US. And we then realized that there was such a need to actually educate doctors, dietitians. Then dietitians wanted to come on board, nurses wanted to come on board, and then coaches have been a big thrust. So to date, we've trained about 6,000 people around the world now. Wow. And we've worked out the influence that's having, and it's starting to really influence. So Jane, our CEO, was saying, well, one doctor influences 5 patients who then influence their cohort and their cohort, and we probably influenced about 74 million people already into this space. So I think there's a lot of hope here. Obviously, we'd love to collaborate more. That's why we're here, because we want to be involved with the SMHP. We really believe in this, and we have connections with Andreas. We have connections with LowCarb Australia, and obviously Prof is very keen that this gets out to the world. And so, yeah, we're doing our little bit there, but we'll be drawing them more and more into this, which is what we want to see. And we'd obviously love to work out ways that we collaborate even further.
One of the highlights of my life was being awake at 2:30 in the morning, so I could be on a Zoom call between Professor Noakes and Max Makavesi from Zimbabwe, who describes himself as a 25th generation cattleman. And so how do we build those bridges? And I think that the society is critical for that. One thing that we're developing within the American Forage and Grassland Council is a speakers bureau. Some listing where someone's gone through and said that these are people, maybe have a listing of topics, that the society would feel comfortable with them going out and being representative, and I'm saying that with full recognition of the possibilities there, but so that if some state or local council of mine was looking for someone that could come to their annual meeting, is there someone in the area, there's contact information, and so that might be a way to help spread the message, because we desperately need to.
I just want to say thank you for everything you guys are doing worldwide. I think kind of what I was trying to say as well is that, there's conferences, as you pointed out, that are more consumer-based, in Colorado and in Houston, and like there's all these people, and there's speakers that we have here and that also speak at these other conferences, like, are we pulling all those people in and all those groups and all those different, you know, whatever their names are? I've only ever gone to this conference, so I don't know. But, you know what I'm talking about, right? The other conferences that I'm sure some of you speak at. Like, how come who would be great to have for the United States to change our food guidelines? And that's how we'd have the big rock. So that's hopefully.
Thank you.
I have a question if there's any advice on advising someone on a ketogenic diet who has no element of metabolic syndrome other than if you count neurologic disorders. Basically Parkinson's, Alzheimer's in a patient that has enough cognitive function, I feel like teaching her.
Is it appropriate, or how would you do it? Or what's the question, John?
Basically, if I'm going to see something unusual, if I take somebody with an insulin of 4 in all normal labs and it's lean, but has a neurologic disorder such as Parkinson's or Alzheimer's and treat them, will I see anything different there? Because almost all of my patients are hyperinsulinemic. And so I'm used to that's just the go-to thing for everything.
So, you know, it depends what you say a keto diet is. If you're using real food, eat as much as you want of meat, poultry, fish, and shellfish and eggs, because it has no carbs, doesn't raise the glucose and insulin. Your hunger goes away. It's a healthy way of eating. So now, hang on. A few of my patients, it's a funny thing, the spouse wants to help the other spouse, or fix the other spouse. I have several of my patients who are starting to do keto in addition to different types of supplementation, and they're claiming to see some improvements in Parkinsonian tremor and all that. You know, the science is still kind of in its infancy about what the ketone level should be and whether you get benefit in the clinic. And so that transition hasn't fully happened, but I have anecdotal support for using that. And Mary Newport talks about using coconut oil, trying to fix her husband, and I mean that spouse thing. 2 of my patients are basically helping their spouse manipulate the food and the ketone levels, and it's an interesting space to be in. And I will teach people how to do that and what to monitor, if they're able and willing to do it. But I can't recommend it. I think you said, will it help? I don't know. It's one of those cancer, neurologic disease. I'll say, look, I'll teach you how to do it, but I can't guarantee it's going to work. Like the insulin resistance, diabetes, obesity, I can pretty much guarantee it's going to work. So I'm pretty upfront, cautious about not being misinterpreted. Although if someone will leave the office and say, well, he told me I should do it for cancer. And then, like the telephone game, someone says, oh, Dr. Westman says it fixes cancer. No, I never said that, but that's what someone might hear. But no, I think it's just healthy eating for anyone, really.
I just have 2 quick points. My introduction into ketogenic therapies was actually Dr. Mary Newport in 2008. We met because it was a news article in the St. Pete Times that her husband, Steve Newport, who I had the opportunity to meet and actually brought him to the university and Mary to give a talk, a guest lecture. I observed with my own eyes him consuming MCT oil, and he had advanced Alzheimer's, and I watched his tremors slowly stop in about 20 minutes. And he became more animated, and that actually gave me more motivation to go into this direction before I started studying ketones. It was right at that intersection. And then the first research that we did was funded by the Alzheimer's Association at the Bird Alzheimer's Clinic on a mouse model of Alzheimer's. And mouse models of Alzheimer's aren't that great, but we saw great improvements in motor function and some other things. But the ketogenic diet is much different than any other diet because it is a legitimate medical therapy, meaning that if you take the ketogenic diet and apply it to epilepsy, independent of the etiology, it's by changing metabolic physiology, you are changing the brain energy systems and the neuropharmacology of your brain in a way that controls seizures. And it's doing it, it's not a magic bullet, it's like a magic shotgun. So it's doing it through a pleiotropic mechanisms that are working in synergy. So the eating, totally changing your macronutrient profile in this way changes your systemic physiology, and that profoundly changes your brain energy metabolism and neurotransmitter systems that may impact patients that have Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's or ALS. And that's what's very different about the ketogenic diet relative to all other diets that we know. It's not a calories in, calories out thing. So you can, weight stable and you get a therapeutic response. So it may be worth applying it. The research is still going, but if you go to clinicaltrials.gov and type in Parkinson's or whatever, you can see a list of clinical trials and see what they're doing and maybe, direct patients there.
I'll just make the comment that I only dabble in things like this when people have been sent home from the specialist with, no, I don't have anything for you, catch you later. And then I say, hey, I don't have time to wait for the trials because you've been rejected by the system.
Yeah, I get, like this morning I woke up, I had 3 or 4 emails from ALS patient, Parkinson's, disorders I've never even heard of sometimes. Like I heard of glycogen synthase disorder type 10 yesterday, which was actually, we have a trial based on Pompe disease, which is glycogen synthase disorders. I'm learning about new therapeutic applications of ketogenic therapies all the time. And I think there's it's a very nascent field using ketogenic diet outside of epilepsy other than obesity and weight management.
Yeah, real quick too, I'm a fellow GP with John, and I met Mary Newport, listened to her at your conference maybe 2017, and it really changed my thinking on this because, for one, there's like absolutely no downside. Most of our pharmaceutical regimens have a lot of downside and risk. And my patients in West Virginia, probably similar to John's, who maybe live with an extended family member or a spouse of 60 years, they're not going to go on a hardcore prescription strength keto diet, but just I think it was a tablespoon 3 times a day was and you probably have to sneak it in. So it's kind of like the backdoor inexpensive way of getting some ketones, but it's like anything, try it and see the response, and if it's a good response, continue it. But if there's no response, that's not the mechanism. I've suggested it to patients. They come in with their children and they say, Dad's got cognitive impairment. There's no doubt. I say, go try some coconut oil 3 times a day. Get rid of the carbs as best you can, and see how they do.
So just to talk, you brought up epilepsy. There's a couple at McDonald's sitting right here who were speaking to me right now at lunchtime and telling me that their son was having about 600 a day.
He had seizures
every 2 to 5 minutes. 400, okay. And doctors were just saying all these different drug therapies that they had to keep trying, and most of them were making him have more seizures or different seizures or whatever. And she kept saying, can't we try the diet? And it's like Charlie's story. I mean, they tried the diet. We say within 2 days or something, he went seizure free. And now he's married with kids and graduated college and everything. It's just freaking amazing.
Yeah. So the mechanism of that was worked out at Johns Hopkins, where the glucose transport receptor is defective, into the brain. So you can't get glucose in, so you have to run the brain on ketones, get around that, or you'll have a problem. And so you feed someone carbs, the insulin goes up, turns off the ketones, you're basically giving that child seizures by feeding them carbs. So, you got to learn that mechanism and model that, and children are born into ketosis. Babies are born into ketosis. You start feeding them sugar in the yams or I don't know, whatever, and you can actually induce seizures. Fortunately, when the kids grow up and all, they may run across a group that uses a ketogenic diet. And my understanding that it's a subset, 5% of all children with epilepsy that will be fixed just like that with the glucose receptor problem, but why not use ketones anyway? I mean, so that's kind of my, Mark, my idea is, why do you want to eat carbs anyway, rather than coming at it from the other way of, oh, it's so restrictive and all that. But
Plan A, if they can do that and they agree to do that, that's the best plan. But if they can't adhere completely to that, the coconut oil, it's an option, I think. There's no downside to it.
I don't know if you know what kind of epilepsy he has, but Dr. Westman was talking about something called glucose transporter type 1 deficiency syndrome, which is a rare metabolic disease where the only standard of care is the ketogenic diet. So that's defined by having a cerebrospinal fluid glucose level of under 2 millimolar. And when patients are put into a ketogenic diet, then the ketones then become an alternative source of energy, and then it restores brain energy metabolism. And kids literally wake up and can move and have a relatively normal life if they can maintain the state of ketosis throughout, with dietary interventions.
Yeah,
Can I shade your language just a little bit? Yeah. I heard it first from Dr. Atkins years ago, and when he's living in the old paradigm, an alternative source of, no, if we don't eat anything, the primary fuel is ketones, basically. Fatty acids and ketones, not glucose. So instead of saying alternatives, so maybe it could be the primary source of fuel.
Yeah, so you can, if you're on a ketogenic diet and you're fasting for even 40 days, your brain is still you still have about 3 millimolar of glucose in your system through gluconeogenesis. And when we break down body fat, the glycerol backbone of those triglycerides then become glucose. But the primary energy source in a prolonged fasting state becomes ketones. And on a clinical ketogenic diet, the primary energy source becomes ketones. And in the context of age-related neurodegeneration, most neurodegenerative diseases are pathophysiologically linked to impaired glucose metabolism. And that's through the glucose transporters, like the GLUT3 transporters, which is on neurons, and also an enzyme, pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. And this enzyme is kind of like the rate-limiting enzyme. And what ketones do is actually go around that enzyme and allows the brain to make energy even when that enzyme's not functioning. There's actually a genetic disorder, pyruvate dehydrogenase deficiency syndrome, and the only thing that works is the ketogenic diet. But it's important for Alzheimer's and other age-related diseases because as we age, and you can look this up on PubMed, the Alzheimer's pathology is actually linked to glucose hypometabolism. It's a hallmark characteristic. So if you take people who have Alzheimer's disease and scan their brains, their brain glucose levels, metabolism is much, much lower. So if you go into a state of ketosis, then the ketones can then provide an alternative source of fuel and then maybe become the primary source of fuel in that context.
There you go.
Okay, I want to be really rude now. Hang on, I'm sorry. I just wanted to maybe redirect this discussion for a little bit. Most of you, and probably all of you, were here when Dave Feldman had that amazing talk on Friday. But he came to me yesterday and said, about the video of that talk, you haven't put it on YouTube yet. Can we hold back on that? And there's the reason he was asking that was because there was this massive response online about this. And I'd just like you to kind of describe what's gone on, and then maybe for everybody, talk because it's really sad that this is happening, and maybe there's some ideas about how we can try to mitigate this in the future. And
so I mean,
I'm sorry.
It's funny, you were talking a little bit earlier about your child with epilepsy. And I'd like to share a little story that I think kind of helps drive something for me. in 2017, when I had characterized lean mass hyperresponders, if you look in that article, the very last paragraph, this was kind of the earliest beginnings of the lipid energy model. Before I had even seen any labs of any children, I was like, if I follow this logically from one end to the other, then it would make sense that actually children would probably be a higher preponderance of lean mass hyperresponders, that we'd actually see this with children. And that article blew up. It actually still has the most comments to this day, somewhere around 1,000, something like that. But later in that year, a couple reached out to me. The father was a neurosurgeon, and the mother was taking care of their toddler, an epileptic child who was thriving on a ketogenic diet. And the one problem was that her blood work came back, everything was looking amazing, except for cholesterol. Total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol was through the roof. And from the pediatrics position, didn't want to take on cholesterol-lowering medication, said, let's just bring in more fructose. And so the diet ultimately that got agreed upon was one that was 80% fat, 15% fructose, 5% protein. And she wasn't doing that great on it. Now here I am, I'm an engineer. I'm like, look, don't take anything I'm saying as medical advice. This is brand new territory. I don't know anything about this. But they're like, well, why aren't there any studies at least? I mean, isn't this getting some attention? Because at least now you're finding that there's a large prominence of these folks. And in 2017, I was like, you know what, I'm going to really take some time to email lipidologists, which I had, by the way, in 2017, 2018. And I tried, privately, to get, I didn't even know about the NIH. I find out about the NIH. I'm trying to get like people who could be grant writers and so forth. Anybody, because it's not adult lean mass hyperresponders that are keeping me up at night. It's honestly, I mean, it's not people who are, who have so many options of diet beyond keto. Keto was literally invented 100 years ago for epilepsy, and particularly for children. And we lost it for a period of time before it came back into prominence because of this. So I'm stunned that there's, even right now, that there's not more of an interest to just measure existing plaque in folks who otherwise seem to be metabolically healthy on a ketogenic diet and who are refusing treatment. And this isn't to say that they should refuse treatment, just that we know that there are many who are anyway, particularly adults. And maybe it should be adults, of course, but why not just measure it? And so, yeah, this has just been the process of this research. And I want to be very upfront that some of the blowback has been appropriate, and that sometimes I'm not the best of researchers because I'm not formally trained. But that said, I do think that we need to get this data, and I think we need to provide it. And I want as many studies done on this as possible. I wish I had a few $1 million in my pocket. I would get 10 of these studies going. So yeah, I'm not surprised that there's a lot of controversy, but for goodness sakes, why are we so afraid of possibly finding out that a group that we thought to be at high risk may not be a high risk group? Why are we so afraid of that? I'm sorry, I totally got on a soapbox there, but.
For those who weren't at your talk, can you describe the study and who might be able to be in it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the plug. And please, seriously, we need to close registration for this study. We're almost there. We're 3/4 of the way. We want to get 100 lean mass hyperresponders. Here's the criteria. If you or anybody you know meet this criteria, if your LDL was 160 or below before you went on a ketogenic diet, and it increased to 190 or higher, and whatever that increase was, it was at least 50%, thus suggesting it was a hyperresponse, and your HDL cholesterol is 80 or higher, triglycerides of 80 or lower. Sorry, did I say HDL of 60 or higher? Yes. An HDL of 80 or lower, and you've been on the diet for at least 2 or more years. Then go to lmhrstudy.com. It'll take you to our IRB approved page, and from there you can look at the criteria. Seriously, we need your help. If this isn't you, but you know somebody, let us get to final registration, then we can get to the way the study works is we fly you to UCLA or whoever the participant is. They get a CT angiogram and a lot of elaborate tests, a lot of blood work and so forth. And then 1 year later, they return and get a second CT angiogram. And what we're interested in is what the longitudinal data is at a population level for these folks. Like, do we find that there is, at a population level, an increase in non-calcified plaque? That's what we're most interested in. But we'll get a lot of other data in there as well.
Folks from North America only?
Yes, sorry. Folks from the United States. Correct.
It would be tragic if that child who had resolution of seizures was told not to do it anymore because of an LDL elevation. Tragic.
I'm just an agronomist, but we have different words, and tragic doesn't begin to express my contempt.
Contemptuous. I guess next question.
So this question is for the physicians. You know, I work in the ER, and I'm hoping to bring this message to the techs and the nurses, just in a presentation form. I'm wondering if you have ever done anything like that with your nursing staff, clinical support, hospital staff, where you've like offered a discount, or you're doing a freebie, or you're giving them some access to you at a discounted rate or for free so that they can learn this stuff.
Well, there's a carbohydrate protocol, therapeutic carbohydrate restriction document from this society that's very helpful. I've already heard people give feedback that they used it for their organization, their people. If you mean like individual change, it's an occupational hazard that people who work for me end up probably doing a low-carb version of the diet and losing weight, and without me even doing anything. I mean, they see the results, they're like, oh my gosh, and it just kind of happens automatically. I can't be their doctor, of course.
No, I mean formalizing like information for them,
Yeah.
because they're not going to come to get the therapeutic carbohydrate restriction guidelines. Just someone that they trust that is giving them the information right in front of them, because they're messengers to the community, right?
Yeah, this was my strategy, and we've done it 4 times at my hospital. You have to partner, find your ally who's high-level nursing, and you do lunch and learns. You know, and pretty much every hospital has a lunch and learn, and they get credit for it, you know, objectives. And then you usually have to do it because lunch is shift. You do a 30-minute, hour presentation and repeat it, you know, a couple times based on their shifts. And you can get anyone there. And then you put little flyers up and you go talk to people, but you need that champion. And I used to have a couple, and they've since resigned. I used to have a couple our lead ICU nurses were truly understanding this, and I don't have the same allies now, so I haven't done one in 3 years, sadly. But we had some good momentum when we had teams and partners who were really passionate about this. So find those people. Maybe they exist, and they're out there. I'm sure they're out there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for doing what you do, and all the speakers that have spoke, and all the people that are here for listening. And I just, following Peter's thing, I'd like to hear a big amen. Amen. I like the enthusiasm of that. So hopefully this question is going to help others. It's phrased to help myself, but I trust that the answer is going to be a bit more deep, and I was encouraged to bring this question to the panel. So I'm kind of a newly reborn human. A couple years ago I wasn't able to function in many ways, physically and mentally, and through ketogenics and clean living and stopping all the bullshit I was doing, here I am today. And one of the things I do today is long distance swimming, and I'll be off to a competition in 2 months for a 10-kilometer swim in Greece. And the question that I posed was, with respect, I would say that I'm keto adapted, not to the extent that Dr. Finney wants his subjects to be in 2 years' time and that type of thing, but I've been in and out of ketosis for the last year pretty regularly. And the question is what's the relationship between I'm going to do a 10-kilometer swim, let's say it's 4 hours, open water ocean swimming, so it's going to be somewhat stressful. what's the relationship between being in ketosis at the beginning of the swim and the relationship between taking on carbohydrates to sustain the power that I need to go through the swim effectively? Hopefully that's a complete enough question.
I can start, and I'm sure maybe Dom has some scientific data working with the military. Very similar scenario to you have. I worked with Special Force guys too, and they're doing these long operations, with minimal caloric intake. But I think, and we chat a little bit offline, Jerome. So what you definitely don't want to do is sabotage your swim. So what we all learned back in the day of running, well, take a big carby breakfast before your long marathon event. And that, you take some goos and some Gatorade right before you start. Now, when you start a long event, you want to be burning fat first and preserve glycogen, but we all thought that was like topping off the tank. So what hormone jacks up if I have a bagel right before I run or swim? Insulin. And what does insulin do to fat oxidation? Shuts it down, right? So the worst thing would be a big breakfast of pancakes. Now, once you're swimming, right, once you're 30 minutes in, remember that little slide of those little magical insulin-independent glucose transporters? Yeah, so blood glucose, you need to maintain stable blood glucose. That 1924 study of the marathoners, they didn't have aid stations in 1924, and it was descriptive, how those people looked at I don't know how accurate the blood glucose meter was, but it looked pretty accurate because the pre and post looked pretty legit. These people's blood sugar were like 40, and they looked horrible. And then they put candy out on the course, and like the same people the next year felt like $1 million because they would just take these little candies. So once you get the fat burning engine going, right, you start your event, have a little protein or something just to fill you up. You're burning fat because that's your 2 years of training, and you're fat adapted, right? So you cannot digest enough carbohydrate for a 4-hour ocean swim for the caloric demands, right? So you've got to have that electric battery, but then play with different glucose supplements during the swim. Gels are a very slow release carbohydrate without the spike, but you got to play with it. Scratch is another brand that's a formulation of carbohydrate. Got to get all the electrolytes in. So you want to get fluid, electrolytes, but yeah, have a slow drip carbohydrate once you're going. And another good idea to do is if you're investing, $10,000 on a trip to Greece, for a swim, is go to the metabolic cart. Figure out maybe a little bit where your zone 2, zone 3 is, maybe by heart rate or just by sensing and feel, because I think like people, for some reason, it costs $150. I have a really awesome exercise physiologist. His name is Ken Murky, trains world-class triathletes. But like $150, go to his lab, bike or run. I think it's hard to do swimming, but he lets them know, and these are probably you've invested a lot, Jerome, so you're pretty nerded out on this stuff. So getting your data is really good sometimes, because then it helps that sensing. I think most of us through experience just kind of get it, but that might take, you haven't done a bunch of 4-hour ocean swims. So, you don't want to keep learning the hard way. You want to set yourself up for success. So that would be my kind of take on that. Practice what you're going to do in training, right? Okay, I want to try this certain gel or goo or drinks. The drinks should have some carbohydrates in a 4-hour event, right? Not be completely non-caloric, just electrolytes. Because you're probably bumping up against some glycolytic work because you're fighting currents. It's probably more like a trail running, where you might have these bursts of, you think you're just going to cruise it like a long bike ride, but you're in the ocean. Maybe there's a shark, and then you got to sprint for your life, and then you're just lighting matches and burning all the glycogen stores. But play around with different strategies, and then you go have fun and believe you're going to do it, right? And know you're going to have bad stretches, right? We all know if you do these crazy events, I'm going to want to quit somewhere along the way. And you just have get out of that, right? Just tell your brain that's not the issue. And you will never bonk. So the word bonk is just non-scientific. We do not bonk. I mean, if your blood glucose goes low, your brain says, I'm done. So restore that blood glucose, right? 1925, have a candy. Now we have all these fancy, expensive gels and things. But like, we're not done. If you think you're done, was it David Goggins, the guy, former Marine, the former SEAL, he was just really hysterical. He's like, if you think you're done, you've only given 40%, right? And he's funny. Listen to David Goggins. His book is called, Can't Hurt Me, and he narrates it. He's hysterical. But yeah, I think, and that's Noakes, central governor, right, Prof, right? Like, no, your brain, I think, is regulating, doesn't want you to die. But I'm sorry, I kind of went long-winded there, but anyone else want to chime in on that from science or experience? And, maybe, I mean, the ketones are interesting, so maybe, I mean, that's what a lot of these high-end guys are doing now, is supplementing some ketones, along the way, maybe give that alternative fuel. These products are military analogies.
Yeah, nothing much more to add. I think that was good. But I think it's important to train in a low insulin, low glucose state. So that'll really facilitate your body's ability to use small amounts of glucose, but also maximize the fat burn. And we have essentially unlimited fat stores while we're exercising. So really try to augment that adaptation by training, doing your intense training in a low glucose, low insulin state, and then use glucose then as your alternative fuel as you're halfway through the event or whatever. But not just glucose, because you want to maximize all energy metabolites. So think about glucose with ketones, like a high molecular weight carbohydrate that has a minimal insulin response, but trickles glucose into your system, with like ketone electrolyte salts. When I was mountain biking, I used something that had alpha-L polylactate, which is Cytomax. Many bikers know about it. So glucose, ketones, lactate as the alternative fuel, because you're really going to be burning fat and ketones from the beginning. But those supplemental fuels will come in good, be very useful at the latter half of your activity.
Excellent.
And even on just a less fancy variety. So the real world is actually kind of interesting. So at Comrades, this race in South Africa, like Coca-Cola can be rocket fuel at the end of one of these things. Just maybe just that, like, you're just like done in that little caffeine hit. And Camille Herron, who has won Comrades, she has beer along the way. And I don't know what kind it is, but maybe it's just something that brings you a little mental joy, and at that point, like, the addiction stuff probably doesn't matter, because you're just like, I just need a little shot of this Coca-Cola. I haven't had a Coke in 10 years because I'm keto, but that's looking really good right now. And they have them at every aid station at Comrades, the Coke, and sometimes I can bring you back from the dead. I don't know about the beer with Camille Herron and the craft beer.
I'd like to...
No, I was just going to mention, just briefly, Prof. Noakes has recently done a whole another 2-hour talk on exactly this. He's gone and looked at his old research again and come back and said, well, actually my glucose levels were dropping, and actually you needed to supplement along the way, and I wish that. So he's now gone and researched, and I think he's rewriting the law of running again with all this. So if you want to watch it, speak to Candace.
And I want to point out an article in the Current Opinion in Endocrinology and Diabetes. I happen to be the special guest editor of the October issue for the last several years, and I have recruited people to write articles, sometimes based on their internet blog. And so one gentleman in the UK, Ian Lake, put together a 0-5-100 project where 8 people walked and ran 20 miles per day for 5 consecutive days without eating anything, total fasting. And they have meticulous data, and I said, hey, you got to put that into a paper, and we'll get in. So this is in the Current Opinion in Endocrinology and Diabetes issue, October 2021, and you'll at least get the experience there. Their main point was, even in type 1 diabetes, they have several people with type 1 diabetes, you're able to do that kind of extensive exercise because you're running on ketones. And they document the ketone levels and all that. And Sam Feltham's N of 1 trial, where he over-consumed 3 different diets. I got him to write up a paper, and we published it in the October issues the last couple of years of, I remember it as co-ed, current opinions in endocrinology and diabetes. You might look that up.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Should I right now? So I've been encouraged to ask another question. I have a tremor of sorts. A couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with pre-Parkinson's, and over the last couple of years, I've been noticing it. It's relatively same, but I've been encouraged to ask Dom the question about the ketones and the relationship with the pre-Parkinson's tremors. And I don't know, is there a different way to ask that? Okay.
Yeah, well, I can't give any medical advice, but I would definitely say to experiment, perhaps with the diet, which sounds like you already are, but titrating in and adding ketones and observing, you know, what you're experiencing. So it is diagnosed as Parkinson's and not something like essential tremor, because essential tremor is sort of the etiology of that is unknown, but that's kind of common too. And I've communicated with people on both, and my anecdotal feedback is that ketosis can help with essential tremor and also a Parkinson's tremor. And I've observed it definitely with Alzheimer's related tremor.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you so very much. Appreciate it.
Now for a geeky question. In the world of ketosis, taking ketones, does it impact your myostatin or follistatin?
Good question. We do know, so myostatin is somewhat linked to, you know, skeletal muscle protein synthesis, and the ketogenic diet is defined really, our production of ketones is dependent upon suppressing anabolic hormones. You know, insulin and IGF-1 tend to go down, mTOR. I don't know if we have any data on myostatin, if that would kind of influence that. But what I do know, and I think where your question is headed, is that could ketones, or could it be impacting muscle mass in any way over long term?
Precisely.
And we know that, I mean, probably one of the main evolutionary consequences of being in a state of ketosis is the muscle sparing effects that ketones have, right? So if we did not make ketones, we would liberate gluconeogenic amino acids like alanine to make glucose. And we don't do that because our liver makes ketones, and that supplies energy to our brain, so we don't have to catabolize our skeletal muscle, which is our main reserve of protein. So in that context, it has been understood that ketones are very anti-catabolic, and if you infuse ketones into a human subject, and you look at things like 3-methylhistidine, so catabolic markers go down. So we know that ketones are catabolic. And my student that has moved on now, Dr. Andrew Kutnick, he studied the anti-catabolic effects of ketones with an LPS model, but also with cancer cachexia. So there's age-related sarcopenia that people have, and cancer cachexia. Also, when you get chemotherapy, that causes muscle wasting, chemo-induced. So in these contexts, ketones tend to be muscle sparing.
Okay.
So
thank you.
So my question may be a little bit on the fringe. Are there any actual scientific study done on best diets based on blood types? The reason I ask is my background is in pharmacy, and one of the fields that's really growing in pharmacy is pharmacogenomics, where we are looking at DNA profiles to customize drug therapy. And so can that concept be applied to diet, especially since there's this debate between vegetarians and carnivores? Does our genetic profile affect how we would respond?
Yeah, the short answer is no. The long answer is there's a book, Eat Right for Your Type, I think. And when I read it, it's basically, oh, you have this type, this type, this type. Well, this one's more vegetarian, this one's more meat, and none of them include junk foods. And they all work. Yet there's no science that I'm aware of.
Actually, I think this was one on the U.S. News and World Report when I got to go underground and look at all these diets, and I have to look at my notes. But I believe that one actually performed better than the keto diet in U.S. News and World Report by the graders. But when I looked at, almost like Nina's slide, when I looked for scientific studies for these, there was zero.
Exactly.
But somehow that one was better than low carb with 1,000 studies. But I'd have to recheck. I think that one was in U.S. News and World Report. If someone has a phone, they can see if that was one of the 40 diets reviewed this year. If it was, it did not have any. There was no science on any of these plans other than really, Mediterranean had some studies, low carb had studies, but all these commercial ones, like no studies at all.
If someone could remind me of Denise Minger, that's it. That clicking sound was the synapse firing.
I didn't hear it.
It was a very small snap. She did a talk at Ancestral Health a few years ago looking at the Eat Right for Your Type thing. And I know it's on YouTube, so if you look for Denise Minger blood type, you might very well find it. And she did a really good job going through it, so you might be interested in that.
Okay.
The U.S. News and World Report or expert panels, the way it's been in the past, it's sort of like, having all judges at the Olympics from the U.S., and then you ask the figure skaters to figure skate, and guess who wins? The U.S. figure skater. So the panels, these expert panels have all been pretty biased in a certain direction, but Mark, I was asked to be one of the expert panel people for this next round. And so we're actually stacking the panel a little bit. Not to bias, so when you're in the middle, you're perceived to be biased when actually, because everyone else is biased. So we are going to bring a more reasonable middle ground, but this is the politics of the expert panel thing. It's just like the Olympics. I mean, of course the Russian was best, or Ukrainian wins.
So you don't feel that it warrants some more study based on genetic profiles? Because in drugs, at least, what we see is that we see very different drug conversion, metabolism between genders, as well as, like just activating a certain drug can be very different between a certain genetic profile. So I'm just asking, does it warrant some additional
Of course,
investigating?
but we're so far away from that in terms of the paradigm. So what I see, you get 23andMe or some genetic testing, it spits out, here's the best diet for you. It's based on that expert panel of people stacked against the low carb. I mean, they're using a biased set of data to create the recommendation. So absolutely, I'm hopeful that one day you get people with minds like Dom to this. We're going to have specific recommendations based on your genotype, but I don't think we're anywhere near that. And I don't think the blood type has been, there was no data in the book, but it was, except at the end it said don't eat junk food. So all of them got better, anyway.
And in the legal analogy, there's two sides to every argument, and then there's the truth. So I think that's what we kind of want is, we all have it, but the truth is somewhere out there. And like the Scopes trial, right? Keep searching for the truth, right? But you'll never catch its coattails.
Thank you. I'm new in the keto area, so I've learned a lot, so I've got a lot to ponder on. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope we can find the best diet for people based on their past, their genetics, and what they want to eat, and to be pleasurable. I heard some themes during this week, which is, that has hedonic in it. Well, dang right. I mean, you can actually eat pleasurably without carbs, or to minimize them, and I'm very hopeful if we get outside the old one-size-fits-all in any approach, that we'll find new ways to optimize human health.
Okay, my question is for seizures, for atonic seizures. I read a lot about tonic seizures and how the ketogenic diet helps, but how effective is it for atonic seizures? I'm asking for my son.
What kind of seizure?
Atonic. So he basically, instead of tensing up, he just drops.
I know the team at Johns Hopkins, led by Dr. Eric Kossoff and McKinsey Cervenka, has done some work. Yeah, my understanding is that these diets tend to work independent of many etiologies, like across the board. I know they work for absence seizures, tonic-clonic, and I'm pretty sure that they would also work for that. But I would direct you to the Charlie Foundation, and Dr. Eric Kossoff, his team, I think has probably the most experience of anyone that I know on that seizure type. Yeah.
Okay, and I have a question for you and for Dave afterwards, so it's...
Okay.
No, I'm
Just a quick question for, I guess, Dom. Where are exogenous ketones absorbed? Stomach, small intestine, etc. Do they benefit gut health at all? In that, the gut benefits from making BHB from indigestible fiber. Just curious about that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. As far as gut health, that's like work in progress now, but we know that butyrate is very beneficial for gut health. Butyrate, the colonocytes, for example, use butyrate as a source of energy. If that's in the gut, then that can be used right there. And also if it's in circulation, it can be supplied to the colonocytes. And then the other question, so when you ingest ketone salts, for example, ketones are ionically bound to the monovalent or divalent cations, and then we absorb the sodium, magnesium, potassium. That gets into circulation, and then the ketone, beta-hydroxybutyrate, can just pass membranes through a variety of different receptors, mostly the monocarboxylic acid transporter, which is sort of ubiquitous throughout many tissues. So yeah, it can readily cross membranes. And if your ketone levels are, and if we go outside the gut, if your ketone levels are 3 millimolar to, it can freely pass across the blood-brain barrier to get to your brain.
So have you done a study that looked how far you label the ketone product or whatever? Does it get down to the colon, or is it all absorbed in the stomach, the duodenum? And I think that's the level of detail she wanted.
Oh yeah, yeah. Good question. No, we haven't done that. So that's a good question. It needs to be done, and also just the effects on the microbiome too need to be done.
Okay, I'm going to be quick here. Dave needs some more questions, or one question. Your data keeper, has he shared with you anything about BMI, or do you have an inkling about BMI and lean mass hyperresponders? Do they seem to be more on the thin phenotype?
Are you talking about You're talking about with the existing study?
Yes.
I couldn't speak off memory right now. I wouldn't know. Obviously, given the prior research, that's going to be my guess. My guess is that the BMI is going to have a negative association with the LDL, that typically the leaner you are, all else being equal and being metabolically healthy, likely the higher your LDL and total cholesterol. And incidentally, it's funny, at these conferences, people will often approach, literally just before a panel, somebody approached and said, my LDL had skyrocketed after I'd gone keto. By the way, I've gained a little bit more weight, and my LDL's got back down again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
So we have a bunch of questions from the, so I'm going to take this mic back there to take some questions from the live stream folks. If you wanted to say something in the meantime, then go for it.
Well, so the LDL thing, it's said that, how do you know something? Teaching it? Do you know it? No, actually, the best lecture I've ever seen was done by a professional speaker. He didn't know anything about what he was talking about. He just read the slides really, really well. So the way you really know something is not just to teach it, it's to write it. So you bring it in, and then you spit it out, you write it, or you dictate it, something like that. So during the pandemic, one of the things I did is to write a cholesterol class. And it really got me, cholesterol is so essential, you need it. And it finally got me to look at the figure that's in the Hallberg paper, the secondary analysis. You've seen it where everything gets better but the LDL. Oh gosh, No, I woke up one day and I thought, it's good to have the LDL go up. Everything got better. Let me say that again. It's good to have the LDL go up. if you're getting better, everything's getting better, and it's only remember, this is just recently for me. I'm not an early adopter. I'm an old paradigm guy, and I woke up as oh my God, you want the LDL to be higher. Everything got better in there, not, everything, and I would pitch this slide. Everything got better except, that LDL.
So
can you see, it's better.
I remember.
You need LDL.
I remember just a few months ago, a certain person came to a National Grazing Lands Coalition
you invited
conference.
me.
Yes, and you came and gave a wonderful presentation, and you spoke engagingly to an audience that was too small for your presence because I suck at coming up with titles. But in any case, once it was done and you had run through all the data, I remember this lovely lady saying, "My doctor is all over me about my cholesterol. Do you know any supplements or special foods I could take?" Now, you had just explained it all, but again, this was her focus, and I watched from the side as someone said, "I don't want you to worry about your cholesterol." And I saw the kind of expression, sort of like, when you get that from
a bird, a parrot.
And then the explanation again. And one of the challenges that we have in this community is that we get used to this kind of message, but you go out into the rest of the world, and sometimes it's like we want to give them all the information we've accumulated in the last 12 years to take them from where we were then to where we are now. And it's like we got to figure a way to say, yeah, the first one's free, but come on back, we got more, and encourage them on this journey. But I remember that moment of a really good presentation with all this compelling information and still the question.
Well, we were taught in medical school you had to hear things 7 times, but that's only because doctors are kind of slow.
Agronomists only need 8.
Okay, so I wasn't sure if you were done. Sorry, I was just waiting a second. Shout out to everybody who's watching from around the world. We've got almost 100 people on the live stream. Thank you again for your time. I just want to check, does anybody need water on the panel? Are you guys good? We have bottles of water? Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat this question. I accidentally asked Steve Finney this question that was meant for Mark. Heidi would like to know, in regards to the movement and exercise, what are the signs, symptoms of being acidic for the average Joe to be aware of?
I think your ventilatory, how you feel, right? So if you're breathing rapidly, that means you're burning carbs. But I think that acidity, it's probably something neurologic because the brain always wants to protect you from dying. So at a certain point, we innervate muscle fibers. We don't activate all of them, so we select certain ones to contract. And there's probably a rate limiter there. Unless your child's under a car, then for some reason you can probably be 100%, and some people do superhuman things, with adrenaline and cortisol. But I think somewhere your brain wants to protect you, and everyone who's done anything, hiking, running, swimming, starts to shut that down and say, okay, I've had enough. So I think there's this intuitive sensing thing. That's more the acidity, is when you're like, we call it, the rigor mortis, right? When you see someone sprinting down that last straight and all of a sudden everything just starts falling apart. Then those muscle units are just not contracting, right? They're just saying, I'm done, and the brain is trying to kind of overpower that. And some people can pull that off really well, right? They have these super high pain tolerances. They're called Navy SEALs. And then there's the mere mortals who just say they're, and my coach explained it like this: there's horses and there's mules, right? The people on the team are horses. They will run till they break, right? And that's just why they're on the team. And the mule is just going to stop. And it's not, neither is better than the other. So I think you have to be aware of what type you are. If you're a horse, be careful because you might hurt yourself, right? They're the people that just run through these, stress fractures and stuff, and that's not a good thing. But I think that the most intuitive thing is just your ventilatory threshold. I think if everyone just was aware of that, we do high school running camps, and we actually put a little piece of tape over the kids' mouths because none of them know how to recover. They think a recovery run is faster than their teammates, right? That's an easy day. They're like Marines, right? What's an easy day to a Marine? It's like, one step ahead of his comrade there. They don't know what easy means. And if you can breathe through your nose, you're in the right zone, right? Your diaphragm breathing, you're in zone 2. And that's a good place. And then, when you have to increase that respiratory rate, you're up in a bit of zone 3. And then do some high intensity stuff toward the end of a workout. And Ben and I were talking about this. When would you time your high intensity stuff? You don't want to do that high intensity stuff early in your workout. Then you create lactate, which shuts off fat burning, right? So you don't want to start your workout with a bunch of intervals and then try to go do zone 2. That's upside down. Do all that nice, easy zone 2 stuff, wake up the mitochondria, and then kind of hit it at the end. I do burpees every day at the end of my run. They're not fun, but they get you probably pretty lactic, and work on all the other things that we get frail, so to not get frail. But I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add to that. Just practical, find something fun to do, right? It's got to be fun.
Okay, thank you. Let me just find another one. We have actually, I think I counted 10 questions, so just so you're aware of the line here. Let's see. Because that one was up a little bit before she wrote back again when the panel started and said, so give me 1 second. Oh, so Jackie Fletcher has a question for Neville. She's in the UK. Hi, Jackie. When testing 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes postprandial, is that from testing before meal or once finished eating? So if someone takes 30 minutes to eat, when do they test?
Great question. Yeah, I didn't actually define that. And in fact, all the studies are taken from the start of eating. So it's 30 minutes from the start of eating, an hour and a half. So I actually do advise that to patients, that it's from before you start. Because even if you eat 30 minutes, you're still going to have that spike at the end. And so, yeah, we've always done it 30 minutes from the start. Or an hour from the start. So I say to patients, on your cell phone, set your timer for an hour and then test.
Great, thank you. I hadn't thought of that because some of us eat slower than others, so good. This is for the entire panel, whoever has the answer, from Barry Hull. Should we consider metabolic syndrome as a spectrum of a number of impairments to our system, and not only is no one treatment useful for any given person, it may also not be sufficient to solve all the stressors that are causing the end result?
Yes.
20 grams of carbs and less, and that's it.
Gerald Raven, 1,000 papers. Yeah, I think Gerald Raven, so, on the stream there, just read any of his papers. I think, when was his first paper? Maybe the mid-1980s, defining it is a syndrome, right? It's just like PCOS is a syndrome. Type 2 diabetes is not a disease, it's a syndrome of carbohydrate intolerance. Type 1 has a very specific pathology to it. So yes, everything is pleiotropic. We've all thrown that word around, but lots of different, you've got genetics, you've got lifestyle, you've got diet, you've got other factors, probably in microbiome, there's the known knowns and the unknown knowns and the unknown unknowns with it. So that's why we keep doing science and appreciate the basic scientists in the room. Eric and I, we just practice, right, Neville? We're just seeing people and watching, observing, but we're not doing the hard science.
So, but it does seem to me like there's 80% from diet. So let's start with the diet, and then undoubtedly there may be other factors that we can begin to then examine and bring in. But if we don't do that bit, I use the analogy of the rain barrel with the short stave. And until you raise the length of that stave, you're not going to hold any more water regardless of what you do to all the other staves. And so that's just an agronomist's contribution.
Yeah, I think as a GP, there's all these unintended consequences of going low carb, and you know, suddenly a headache goes away, or irritable bowel goes away, and in fact, you know, suddenly you start thinking when somebody comes in with a headache, and it's part of the syndrome, and you tell them go and cut the carbs and come back, and they come back, and the headaches have gone away. You know, so there's just metabolic syndrome is a collect. I mean, it just goes across so many things, but not everybody presents the same way with diabetes or with overweight, but they, you know, one will have hypertension, one will have the other syndrome. So I think start with the diet.
Okay, thank you. This one's listed for Dr. Westman. What's your favorite lipid panel marker to see on a patient history? What do you think about apolipoprotein B, or ApoB, and lipoprotein A, or LP, little a? In your opinion, those labs, are they useful, and are they needed to predict a heart failure?
Well, we didn't measure those lipoproteins in the cases that I presented with heart failure. I think anything related to cholesterol is less important than diabetes, metabolic syndrome, smoking. Remember, metabolic syndrome is blood pressure, blood sugar, abdominal circumference, so triglyceride, HDL, and then you can talk about these other things. Jeff Volek actually had several cases of Lp(a) getting better on a keto diet. I don't remember if it was published as a letter or not, but so actually lifestyle change can accomplish a lot. And like Neville said, you know, I don't know if you're ready for this, but just about everything gets better. Any chronic medical condition. Remember, you can go to a doctor that doesn't ask you about what you eat and drink. They'll diagnose you and put you on a pill or a shot or something. Or you can go to a doctor that asks you what you eat and drink and thinks that that's an important factor. And so I really don't get worked up about those cholesterol numbers and levels anymore.
Can I add to that real quick?
Of course.
At the risk of sounding like a broken record, because I say this many times over, but now we're published, you can check out the lipid energy model. I really do think we're ultimately going to find that lipid levels are more relevant in the patterns that they appear in downstream of the root cause. So when your metabolism gets better, what the resulting lipid levels are more indicative of what the status of the body is, including the atherogenetic risk of atherosclerosis, right? I know that right now, current conventional medicine believes that no, those lipid levels, they can be quantified in their atherogenicity at a per particle level or a per lipid metric. And I just want to make the prediction, I think in time we're going to find that indeed lipid profiles, looking at these in combination and how it is that they manifest as the machine that is our body shows them to be, will be far more relevant. And that in looking at these correlations right now, I think we're trying to derive way too much weight on a per lipid basis.
Yeah, I just want to, I know there's been some data on Lp(a) and ApoB independently, but I think we need to have an algorithm that we put all these factors in, like blood pressure, even like functional biomarkers, like ability to do certain exercises, and even body composition, lean mass or fat mass, to really understand Lp(a) and ApoB in the context of people who are not metabolically broke. And I think this is a big issue because the data is pretty solid, like on Lp(a) being an independent risk factor. And I'm still kind of on the fence about that, but not so much in the context of people who have great metabolic health. You know, but the data is kind of solid on that if you talk to some experts. So, so I think we really need to develop these models that incorporate what Dave was saying, all these different factors.
Sorry, just from my point of view as a basic GP, everybody wants to know their cholesterol. Unfortunately, every year you have to say, I have to try and delay doing cholesterol. But if I am going to look at something, it's just triglycerides, because that's the thing that improves the most on a low-carb diet. And I say I think 1 milligram per liter, what did we work out, was 50 or something. So I aim for under 1 in South Africa. I say, if you've got your triglyceride under 1, you're doing great. And most of my diabetics can get there if they're following a low-carb diet. In fact, it's quite a good, for me, marker of whether they're actually following the diet or not.
Yeah, just one real quick final thought there. What Dave is doing is like massively important. So I think in school we learn what's called the null hypothesis. This is what we assume to be true until proven otherwise. So if you take those optimum well humans with normal blood vessels, our null hypothesis should be in that N of 1 individual, whatever their lipid profile, until proven otherwise, whatever they are in that state of wellness should be optimal to them, and prove to me, like the Sarah Hallberg, if this one thing goes up, but if these people are getting better, someone has to prove that that's causing harm before we assume it's causing harm, and we have to disprove that. So if that makes sense.
Great,
thank you, Dave.
Neville, can I translate your unit of 1 for 1 million? Isn't that 88? Something like that. Or no, that's not right. Anyway, that was the units. 49. Yeah. Anyway. You do things wrong over there. You do things wrong because it's different. And it must be bad. Yeah, because you do it differently. It must be wrong and bad. Because, you keto people, well, yeah, what's your point? Remember, you're in America. Oh, sorry.
Any more banter?
All done with the banting. I'm banter.
Banting. Ooh. Ravi Kampabali has another question. This is for Dom. Could you comment on wound healing and therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, keto medicine intervention? Is waiting? Says something about waiting for the clinical trial in humans. Please comment.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to make a comment about that. One of my students, former PhD students, Dr. Shannon Kessel, published a great dissertation that needs to get published. The dissertation's published. But we observed that with nutritional ketosis and ketone supplementation, using Doppler blood flow measurements, that we can enhance wound healing in an aged model of ischemia. And wound healing costs taxpayers billions of dollars, so it's a major problem. And all the wound healing sort of therapies are putting something directly on the wound. And we know from diabetic wounds that if we change our metabolic physiology, we are improving blood flow, making blood less thick. And the ketones too also have a variety of different things that we've heard about, but they also increase a molecule called adenosine, and adenosine can increase blood flow. So a decrease in reactive oxygen species, inflammation, increased blood flow, which delivers more oxygen, glucose, and ketones. So I really do think that it's almost a low-hanging fruit to use ketogenic therapies, dietary therapies. We've kind of worked with the VA population on this, and it's hard to change their diets. That's actually where I think exogenous ketones could come into play. When they're given acutely, you can see a 20 to 30% increase in blood flow to an ischemic wound. And if you have an ischemic wound, the ATP levels are like 90% lower, and by acutely increasing ketones, you can increase blood flow to that area. And I really do think that this is an underappreciated area of science that needs to move forward, using ketogenic therapies for wound healing.
Wow, that's amazing. Let's see, next one. Did anybody else didn't have a comment? Okay. This is also for you, Dom, from Melio Campo, about the insulin and cerebral roles. Have you seen in your career any cases when the basal insulin goes up? And if this change could, And if this change could suppose a temporary response to support, protect, or regulate brain function in patients with cognitive impairments?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I do know that intranasal insulin, so type 3 diabetes has been termed insulin resistance in the brain. And there's some work being done, and I even know of people who are using intranasal insulin to actually increase, it does a number of different things, but increase energy metabolism in the brain. So I'm not sure I'm getting to the question, but a consequence of metabolic syndrome is, insulin resistance in the brain too. And I have some theories about that. I think that low-level systemic inflammation will lead to neuroinflammation. The cytokines, chemokines that cause systemic inflammation in the body will trigger inflammation in the brain, and that will make the brain have impaired glucose metabolism. And I do think that maybe delivering insulin in that way, and we can overcome this with just changing our physiology, but actually elevating ketones can overcome the insulin resistance in the brain. I think maybe that's in line with the question.
It does. I'm sorry, I missed this. There was a line that she was not able to type it all into that question, and she put it into context, and she did say, in older people who do follow a ketogenic diet, who may be dealing with cognitive impairments, would the increase in basal insulin help, I think is what she's saying.
Well, ketogenic therapies work by virtue of suppressing insulin,
Yes.
the hormone insulin, and that increases ketones, but by improving our overall metabolic health, we become more insulin sensitive, so insulin works better, from the receptor standpoint.
Yes, okay, thank you. Mitch and Carol Cole, research shows that the insulin response to consumption of dairy is greater than would be expected by its carbohydrate content. Since part of the motivation of being on a low-carb ketogenic diet is to keep insulin levels low, would it be preferable to limit or avoid dairy?
Yes.
Thank you. If you don't have anything to expand on, we'll move to the next question.
I tell people to be cautious because it's like nuts. It's one of those foods that if you're triggery, I can sit down and eat a whole block of Kerrygold cheddar, but I'm not trying to lose weight. So I think you just have to be a bit careful if that's a trigger food for you to have, very good quality, and satiating, if it's giving you satiety. But if you find you overeat, cheese, especially like processed cheese, probably not a good place to go. It might not get you to your goal. That would be my only real thought about that.
If weight loss is a problem on the ketogenic diet, which sometimes it is with kids following it for pediatrics, you want their weight to increase. Dairy is a way to, maintain their weight and increase weight. So, and I actually lose too much weight on a strict ketogenic diet and have to incorporate dairy fat and a lot of sour cream. My wife will tell you, a lot. So that is a way to just get in extra calories. But dairy protein tends to sort of not settle too well with me, so maybe the question's more about dairy protein, but I think dairy fat is great. But if your goal is for weight loss, it's easier to lose weight on a low-carb ketogenic diet if you reduce the dairy consumption.
And that was the top kind of change that was made by students who took our class at the Adapt Your Life Academy. It's my retirement plan outside of Duke. So I have a company called Adapt Your Life and Adapt Your Life Academy. And the number one thing that people said they changed to get success on the approach that we taught was limiting the dairy. So our approach, which actually came from Dr. Atkins when I visited him in 1998 and said, "What do you do?" He gave me a list of foods, and dairy, cream, cheese was limited. In fact, what they did is that there was a blank sheet of paper, and Jackie Eberstein, the nurse or the practitioner, would pull out a blank and say, "Well, this week you can go from 1 ounce of cheese to 2 ounces." And I saw, oh, great, I can do that. So when I got that list, I thought, well, no one's going to do this blank thing. Give me a number. So we came up with 4 ounces of cheese and 2 ounces of this and all that. But not limiting it was one of the major reasons why the internet version of keto didn't cause weight loss when people wanted it. And then there were other factors like measuring and it gets too complicated when you use an app and follow macros and all that. But yeah, so you do want to limit it. But if you're trying to limit calories, and really that's what happens on a low carb diet without counting calories. Your hunger goes down, you eat less. So that was my flippant, yes, you need to control.
I will be the odd man out in that actually I find when I'm trying to be very militant keto, it genuinely benefits me to have a little bit more snacking on cheese. And I want to be specific though, because liquid and refined forms of fat like butter and heavy whipping cream, no. I can't overconsume that really easily. But cheese in particular seems to be a kind of dairy that works well with me, although to be fair, I think I have some genetics linked to what's known as lactose persistence. So I had some Northern European ancestry, which I guess were some of the first who were into dairy. So there may be a connection there. But regardless, I tend to find that I'm kind of like the Amber O'Hearn, Siobhan Huggins types, where if I have more fat as a percentage and it's coming from forms like, say, cheese or meat fats, I actually get so satiated with a much lower amount of food consumption and calories in total. And it works for me personally.
Great, thank you. And those are great points, because sometimes there are thin people who want to do this for medical reasons. So Dom, that was a really good point. So somebody says they don't want to lose weight, but they want to do this for a medical reason. They could make sure they're eating enough dairy to keep their weight up, or others. I'm going to try to repeat this question for Robbie, and it is for Dom because he wasn't in the room earlier. I asked Steve Finney, and he wasn't sure of the term, so I'm going to see if you are. Could you comment on physiologic insulin resensitization in addition to ketogenic nutrition lifestyle?
I'm not sure I can comment because I'm trying to understand the question. Maybe the question is getting to physiological insulin resistance that may happen in the context of very restrictive ketogenic diets. Yeah. So, when you're on a ketogenic diet, it suppresses insulin, and then insulin's function, doesn't really have too much to do because you're not taking in carbohydrates. So the action of insulin at the level of the receptor becomes less. And I think some people in the ketogenic community have noted that there's an increase in their baseline glucose levels will rise over time, and that has been coined kind of loosely physiological insulin resistance. And I think kind of what's happening is that because insulin is not being released, that decreases glycolysis. So a ketogenic diet is very glucose sparing because you're oxidizing and burning so much fat that the little amount of glucose that we're even making endogenously is not being taken up in the tissues because fat oxidation is so high. But I think the important thing to look at is insulin. I think insulin is very low. I think that's actually more important than blood glucose. And I think when people talk about this physiological insulin resistance, they might be talking about the elevated glucose level, maybe, for example, in the morning. And then I know some people may have higher glucagon levels, especially if their insulin is very low, and that glucagon or cortisol in the morning could be contributing to that early morning rise in glucose. So the people who have emailed me say, is this physiological insulin resistance? And I kind of describe it in that way. But I think, it's important to get blood work. I don't think it's pathological. I think if that's where the question's going, I don't think it's pathological, but comprehensive blood work would tell that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, just one quick thought there, because the person was mentioning insulin resensitization. I think that's what you said, Pam. So the group that someone would have to go PubMed search this. So the type 1 patients who are insulin resistant, taking 80 units, 100 units of insulin as type 1s, that's the perfect model, because when they go low carb, and probably Eric similar, like there's a number of patients I have who are type 1s, right? They're called double diabetes. It's terrifying, the future of that. But then they fix their diet, and all of a sudden they have an insulin pump. We know exactly how much insulin they're using. And then they'll reset, they'll kind of start dialing it down, and some of them get down to like 25 units of insulin a day over time. So something is happening. They're resensitizing to insulin, because now their blood glucoses are good on a third of the insulin they were taking. I don't know the mechanisms. Someone would have to really, you'd need some good grad students to do biopsies and things. But it's happening. I mean, it's real, because that's objective data. If you were on 100 units of insulin as a type 1 and now you're on 25, somehow your body's seeing the insulin better.
We literally had there was a gentleman who had type 1 diabetes here a few years ago. He went as far as he was doing carnivore diet at one. He had graduated down from ketogenic to carnivore, and then he met Dr. Ben, and he started doing the smart resistance training, and within a few weeks, he had titrated all the way down to 11 units of insulin per day.
What's his basal? It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I want to echo that I don't think it's abnormal or pathologic to have a slightly different blood level when you compare your level to carb eaters.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a lab test, it's from carb eaters.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where the normal range has been. If you have a ketone level that's not 0, you're marked abnormal on these tests. So I'm hopeful that ownyourlabs.com will will actually develop a new normal range, including the glucose metabolism. The insulins are probably going to be way too low, abnormally low. The glucose might be just a little bit too high. And the A1C, what about the A1C? There's some people who are carnivore, not eating any carbs, and their A1C is high. And you just have to look in, the A1C is not a exact test of one thing. It actually is a factor dependent on the red blood cell life and all that. But you could actually participate in kind of a opt-in sort of creating distribution of folks who do a keto diet, right, Dave?
I'm going to have to pay Eric by the end of this panel, but yes, actually, the genesis of Own Your Labs, who, by the way, I have a wonderful business partner in Siobhan Huggins, who's, of course, doing a lot of great work in lipedema right now. But the genesis of it was citizen science, in that what we wanted to do was not just have a model where there are already lots of reseller services out there for blood work, but on top of that, incentivize people at checkout for a 10% discount to contribute their anonymized data. So if you go to ownyourlabs.com, you're just like Amazon, you're checking out all the different blood work. You then get to the checkout, and then we offer that. And if you take it, we have a little more demographic information. You fill that out, and we anonymize it, and that we take away your name, date of birth, et cetera, and that goes to our data pool. And the plan, which will, I think, be very informative for exactly what you talked about, I'm glad you mentioned it, is we will see these kinds of ranges. If somebody marks themselves as being lean and they're somewhat athletic, for example, and then their labs, which are coming back and will end up in the database, show that indeed we see this central tendency. That'll be very relevant. And granted, it's not the same as a direct trial, but I think it'll inform a lot of potential trials that we can set up in the future, which is why I'm just so thankful for everybody who's opting in, which, by the way, we have about an 85% opt-in at this point in time.
Excellent. Congratulations. Yeah. Eric, when you said the A1Cs go up sometimes with carnivore, did you mean like 5s, mid 5s, high 5s? Are they actually getting into the 6s, or?
In the 6s.
Yeah?
Yeah. So the A1C, is thought of as the diagnosis of diabetes, right?
Yes.
Well, the test is how much glucose gloms onto the hemoglobin molecule, and the longer the red blood cell is in the circulation, the higher the glucose will be. So if your red cell lives longer, your A1C will be higher, and you don't have any diabetes. So the A1C interpretation can be misleading, and so checking a blood glucose level with a high A1C will show you that, no, you don't have a high glucose level, or maybe you have that physiologic insulin resistance. So just be very careful to not worry about just one number, and if you're eating like our ancestors did and evolutionary, did you catch that from Steve Finney, one of those pearls, thousands of years of evolution created all of these things, like the organ kind of analogy. I thought that was great, because there are a lot of pipes, a lot of it's a difficult, complicated system, but don't worry about one number, please. We've had people get the Libre, the CGM or Dexcom, doesn't matter, and then they freak out about a blood glucose of 102. No, it spiked from 80 to 100. Well, so then there's the false interpretation of a change of 20 being abnormal or something to worry about. So please, take a deep breath when you look at these numbers, and well, you might go to a doctor. They don't ask you what you eat and drink, and they'll put you on a pill for the anxiety, but you don't want to do that.
Let me just add, I personally know, and I'll bet a lot of you guys do, I personally know a very large number of lean mass hyperresponders with fasting glucose in the 90s, even low 100s, with an A1C that's in the high 5s, and in some cases a 6. But here's the difference. You put a CGM on them, it's flat. It's a flat board, right? Typically, the highest glucose levels are early in the morning. And oftentimes, it's when they're exercising. And they tend to have a very consistent low insulin level that tends to be very predictive and does not, none of these tend to be progressing, right, to where they're getting worse and worse. And diabetes ultimately is one of metabolite dysregulation, right? To where if you put a CGM on somebody who's severe type 2 diabetic, you're going to see these excursions going up and down. And so, yeah, is it pathological? Of course we should say that we could use further research, but I'll be upfront that I'm somewhat doubtful. I think that we may be looking at homeostasis.
Yeah, someone got into a debate with me, said, well, what if you're on a keto diet and you put on a continuous triglyceride monitor and you eat a high-fat meal and you see it spike up? Well, then, you could say that's bad. But typically what happens is that, when you are fat adapted, your triglycerides, I know mine got cut in half. So it's not a very good argument, actually. So generally speaking, but I do, kind of getting back to that point, when your body is burning a lot of fat, it is to some extent sparing some of the glucose, so that there might be a slight elevation of glucose over time. And I don't know if this gives, promoting, if you are more metabolically flexible and occasionally add in more fibrous carbohydrates here and there, that may just slightly boost your carbohydrate tolerance and insulin sensitivity in a way that brings that down. So I did notice that over time, in studying the ketogenic diet, I was very, very strict with it, that when I titrated just some more salads, some more vegetables, 1 or 2 pieces of fruit a day, my fasting insulin actually went down a little bit, and then my blood glucose tends to stay in even the 60s and 70s now, just by adding like a little bit of fibrous carbs. But I'm not trying to lose weight or anything, so that's. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. And Eric, you've always said for years you want to have values of labs for people who don't eat carbs. You call it the ketogenic lab. Maybe the society can work on having the expected lab values of somebody who's been doing a therapeutic ketogenic diet for a number of years, or.
Yeah, maybe we can work with ownyourlabs.com. Now, and I understand, and I promise to actually do it, Dave, this time. You go to LabCorp, and they draw the blood. There are LabCorps everywhere.
Yep.
So it sounds like it would inform, is there a new normal range for those who don't eat carbs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, the next panel is about ketone numbers, so talking about values. Melly has seen in keto veterans, who usually in some individuals, mainly women, the ketones eventually go down through time. Have you considered numbers between 0.1 to 0.3 still a range of nutritional ketosis?
Yeah, I think each person is like a unique metabolic entity, and I think over time with a ketogenic diet, you are utilizing ketones in a greater capacity than you were when you initiated the diet. So that might come down, but I think that you have to look at everything else too. So if the ketones are going away and then insulin's starting to come back up, I mean, maybe they're just eating too much. When you take the ketogenic diet and you calorie restrict it just a little bit, that tends to, further ketosis. I wouldn't be so fixated on the ketone number, more like how you feel and what your body composition is doing. So it's very context dependent, but I know, I've been in a lot of discussions in the world of epilepsy, and we're still trying to figure out if ketones are important for seizure control. We know that when we give a bolus of ketones in experimental models, that they have very strong anti-seizure effects. But you could use something like a low glycemic index diet, and in certain forms of epilepsy, that can actually work. So just by reducing glycolytic activity. And everybody's trying to come up with a ketogenic diet in a drug, and 2-deoxyglucose is actually used in some clinical trials and shows the data is pretty good, just inhibiting glycolysis. So when we go on a ketogenic diet, by virtue of lowering insulin, that actually reduces glycolysis. So there's some benefits there. And I think there's a lot of things going on. It's not just the ketone numbers, but also the reduction in glucose metabolism that's therapeutic.